Hey folks, welcome to the pre-show for the Intrepid radio program. Glad to have you here. This is just our little 4-minute and 25-second countdown to going live on the radio station over at Odyssey Radio. So, and I'm kind of all set up. So there's not much to do. I think I'm all ready to go tonight. How are you all? Glad you could make it tonight. Oh, you know, there's one thing I didn't do. That was plug in my headset, but I'm just going to, you hear how we get that little bit of an echo? I'm just going to turn my sound down a bit so you don't pick that up rather than wear the earbuds or the headset. So good to see you all. Glad you made it in. Hey, Lalanya. Good to see you. And Leslie Holker, of course. Good to see you. Glad you made it in tonight for a Monday night. And just a couple of minutes to go, 3 minutes to go, and we go live over on the radio station. So hang in there. Morgan Snow, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. I got to get something to drink. I'll be right back. We got about 2.5 minutes till we go live. I may not have anything in here. It's cold. Uh-oh. Nope. Uh-oh. Doesn't look like it. Got nothing cold in the fridge. And I don't like drinking warm soda. And I don't have time to run upstairs and get anything else.
Farting. Smells like farts.
Not my problem. Nope. There we go. All right. Only thing cold in there is beer. And I can't drink beer while I'm broadcasting. No, I can't. The captain's cabin. Doing calisthenics there?
Yeah.
Very nice. Hey, Ellen Stiles. Good to see you. Barbie D, nice to see you. And Joe Mara. Grumpy Stack. Good to see you from Louisiana. Delaney Pearl Jones is here in all her cosmic glory. Good to see you all. We got about a minute here left, and less than a minute, and we go live over on Odyssey Radio. For those of you coming in new and don't know the lay of the land yet, how we do this. Hey, Remeldian. And hey, Steph, Cuero Queen. 4 minutes and 25 seconds after the top of the hour, we go live at Odyssey Radio. Master Finn is here. Good to see you, brother. Okay, I'm going to go dark for a few seconds. Stand by, and we'll be live.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAlanRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, AlanRoberts.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad, so he can take me to Disneyland.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
We are hot on the mic. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. It's Monday evening. You're listening to and watching the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. You can hear the audio broadcast right from the radio station at odysseyradio.com. That's ODYSY radio.com. You can also see the video simulcast of this show, and you can watch that in two places. Over at facebook.com/Odyssey Radio and over at my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. And go ahead and like the broadcast over there. Give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. And you can also join the channel. Just click the little join button. It'll tell you everything you need to know over there. So welcome to the program. Welcome to everybody over in the chat room. If you are not over at the YouTube channel, you can, if you want, you can come on over, join the live chat room that's going on right now, inhabited by fellow Intrepids. And remember, right after the broadcast goes off the air on Odyssey Radio, we stick around over on the YouTube channel for a little bit of what has been dubbed the Captain's Cabin. Arr. And that's where we go below decks, and the captain serves up a little bit more. And so if you stick around, we'll have more open conversation over there. Tonight, I'm going to do something a little out of the ordinary, although I've done this kind of thing before. We're just going to read a story tonight. Not my story. I did not write it. It's a little book that I bought, and I read it to the family at bedtime. And so I want you to grab a little libation, sit back, enjoy this. I'm hoping that this is not cold. That's old, not cold. All I have is cold beer in the fridge, not a cold soda pop or cold water. So I don't want to drink beer when I'm broadcasting. It could get funny real quick. Well, eventually, not real quick. And so my wife is gallivanting around here somewhere. And so now that everything is ready to roll, I'm going to jump into this book. I don't have much to say about it by way of commentary. I just found it a neat little book. And it's called Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch. I haven't timed it, but I think we could probably fit this whole book into the broadcast tonight. And I wanted to kind of do this just to give us something a little different, and at the same time give you a time to sit back, enjoy, chat, talk, have a nice bedtime story, unless you're working nights and you don't go to bed after this. So here we go. We're going to give it a shot. So all of you over there in the chat room, enjoy. And those of you listening audibly, enjoy and see what you think. Now, this is a little story called Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch. It's by Kelly Barnhill. And Kelly Barnhill, by the way, I'll tell you at the end when I get there. Otherwise, I have to advance everything beyond what I'm doing here. So let's get on with it. Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch. The day she buried her husband, a good man by all accounts, though shy, not given to drink or foolishness, not one for speeding tickets, or illegal parking, or cheating on his taxes, not one for carousing at the county fair, or tomcatting with the other men from the glass factory, which is to say, he was utterly unknown in town, a cipher, a cold blank space. Agnes Sorensen arrived at the front steps of Our Lady of the Snows. The priest was waiting for her at the open door. The air was sweet and wet with autumn rot, and though it had rained earlier, the day was starting to brighten, and would surely be lovely in an hour or two. Mrs. Sorensen greeted the priest with a sad smile. She wore a smart black hat, sensible black shoes, and a black silk skirt, belted into a slim crepe skirt. Two little white mice peeked out of her left breast pocket. Two tiny shocks of fur with pink, quivering noses and red tongues. The priest, an old fellow by the name of Lawrence, took her hands and gave her a gentle squeeze. He was surprised by the mice. The mice, on the other hand, were not at all surprised to see him. They inclined their noses a little further over the tip of her shirt pocket to get a better look. Their whiskers were as pale and bright as sunbeams. They looked at one another and turned in unison toward the face of the old priest. And though he knew it was impossible, it seemed to Father Lawrence that the mice were smiling at him. He swallowed. "Mrs. Sorensen," he said, clearing his throat. She said, looking at her watch. She glanced over her shoulder and whistled. A very large dog rounded the tall hedge, followed by an almost as large raccoon and a perfectly tiny cat. "We can't—" but his voice failed him. "Have the flowers arrived, Father?" Mrs. Sorensen asked pleasantly as the three animals mounted the stairs and approached the door. "Well," the priest stammered, yes, they have 3 very large boxes, but I must say, Mrs. Sorensen—" "Marvelous, pardon me," and she walked inside. "Hold the door open for my helpers, would you? Thank you, Father." Her voice was all brisk assurance. It was a voice that required a yes. She left a lingering scent of pine sap and lilac and woodland musk in her wake. Father Lawrence felt dizzy. "Of course," the priest said, as dog and raccoon and cat passed him by, a sort of deliberation and gravitas about their bearing, as though they were part of a procession that the priest himself had rudely interrupted. He would have said something, of course, would he have? He would have. But these animals had, well, he could hardly explain it. A sobriety of face and a propriety of demeanor. He let them by. He nodded his head to each one as they crossed the threshold of the church. It astonished him. He gave a quick glance up and drove up and down the quiet street, to reassure himself that he remained unobserved. The last thing he needed was to have the parish council start fussing at him again. The parish council was made up at this time of a trio of widowed sisters whose life's purpose, it seemed to the priest, was to make him feel as though they were in the midst of stoning him to death, using only popcorn and lost buttons and bits of yarn. 3 times that week he had found himself in the fussy crosshairs of the sisters' ire, and it was only Wednesday. He rubbed his ever-loosening jowls and cleared his throat, seeing no one there except for a family of rabbits that was en masse, emerging from under the row of box elders. Father Lawrence felt a sudden, inexplicable, and unbridled surge of joy, to which he responded with a quick clench of his 2 fists and a swallowed yes. He nearly bounced. "Are you coming?" Mrs. Sorensen called from inside the sanctuary. Yes, he said with a sputter. "Of course." But he paused anyway. A young buck came clipping down the road. Not uncommon in these parts, but the priest thought it odd that the animal came to a halt right in front of the church and turned his face upward as though he was regarding the stained-glass window. Could deer see color? Father Lawrence didn't know. The deer didn't move. It was a young thing. Its antlers were hardly bigger than German pretzels, and its haunches were sleek, muscular, and supple. It blinked its large, damp eyes and flared its nostrils. The priest paused as though waiting for the buck to say something. "Dear, don't speak," he told himself. "You're being ridiculous." Two hawks fluttered down and perched on the handrail, while dear God, was that an otter? Father Lawrence shook his head, adjusted the flap of belly hanging uncomfortably over his belt, and slumped inside. The mourners arrived 2 hours later and arranged themselves silently into their pews. It was a thin crowd. There was the required representative from the glass factory. A low-level supervisor, Mr. Sorensen, was not important enough, apparently, to warrant a mourner from the upper-level managerial position, and was certainly not grand enough for the owner himself to drive up from Chicago and pay his respects. The priest bristled at this. The man died at work, he thought, surely. He shook his head and busied himself with the last-minute preparations. The pretty widow walked with cool assurance from station to station, making sure everything was just so. The mourners, the priest noticed, were mostly men. This stood to reason, as most of Mr. Sorensen's co-workers were men as well. Still, he noticed that several of them had removed their wedding rings or had thought to insert a jaunty handkerchief in their coat pockets in what could only be described as non-funeral colors, or had applied hair gel or mustache oil or aftershave. The whole church reeked of men on the prowl. Mrs. Sorensen didn't seem to notice, but that was beside the point. The priest folded his arms and gave a hard look at the backs of their heads. Really, he thought. But then the widow walked into the brightly colored beam of the stained glass sunlight, and he felt his heart lift, and his cheeks flush, and his breathing quicken and thin. There were people, he thought, who are easy to love, and that is that. Mrs. Sorensen had done a beautiful job with the flowers, creating arrangements at each window in perfect dioramic scenes. In the window depicting the story of the child Jesus and the clay birds that he magicked into feathers and wings and flight. For example, her figure of Jesus was composed of corn husk, ivy, and dried rose petals. The clay birds she had made with the homemade dough and affixed to warbled bits of wire. The birds bobbed and weaved unsteadily as though only just learning how to spread their wings, and her rendition of Daniel in the lion's den was so harrowing in its realism, so brutally present, that people had to avert their eyes. She had even made a diorama of the day she and her husband met. A man with a broken leg at the bottom of a gully in the middle of a flowery forest. A woman with a broken heart, wandering alone, happening by and binding his wounds. And how real they were. The visceral pain on his face, the sorrow hanging over her body like a cloud, the quickening of the heart at that first tender touch. This is how love can begin, an act of kindness. The men in the congregation stared for a long time at that display. They shook their heads and muttered, "Lucky bastard." Father Lawrence, in his vestments, intoned the Mass with all of the feeling he could muster. His face weighed somberly with the loss of a man cut down too soon, though not, it should be noted, with any actual grief. After all, the priest hardly knew the man. No one did. Still, 58 is too young to die, assuming Mrs. Sorensen was 58. In truth, the priest had no idea. Mrs. Sorensen sat in the front row, straight-backed, her delicate face composed, her head floating atop her neck as though it were being pulled upward by a string. She held her chin at a slight tilt to the left. She made eye contact with the priest and gave an encouraging smile. It is realized later to give a homily when there is a raccoon in the church, and a very large dog, and a cat. Though he couldn't see them, they had made themselves scarce before the parishioners arrived. He still knew they were there, and it unnerved him. The white mice squirmed in Mrs. Sorensen's pocket. They peeked and retreated again and again. Father Lawrence tripped on his words. He forgot what he was going to say. He forgot Mr. Sorensen's name. He remembered the large, damp eyes of the buck outside. Did he want to come in? Father Lawrence wondered, and then, don't be ridiculous, dear, don't go to church. But neither, he reasoned with himself, did raccoons. But there was no one here somewhere. There was one here somewhere, wasn't there? So Father Lawrence mumbled and wandered. He started singing the wrong song. The organist grumbled in his direction. The insufferable sisters, who never missed a funeral if they could help it, sat in the back and twittered. They held their programs over their faces and peered over the rim of the paper with hard, glittering eyes. Father Lawrence found himself singing, "Oh God, your creatures fill the earth," though it was not on the program, and the organist was unable to play the accompaniment. "Your creatures live in every land," he sang lustily. "They fill the sky and sea. O Lord, you give us your command to love them tenderly." Mrs. Sorensen closed her eyes and smiled, and outside a hawk opened its throat and screeched, the lingering note landing in harmony with the final bar. That was October. Father Lawrence did not visit the widow right away. He'd wait, he thought, let her grieve. The last thing she needed was an old duffer hanging around her kitchen. Beside, he knew that the insufferable sisters and their allies on the Improvement League and the Quilters Alliance and the Friends of the Library and the Homebound Helpers would be, even now, fluttering toward that house, descending like a cloud. In the meantime, the entire town buzzed with the news of the recent Sasquatch sightings. Only here and there, and not entirely credible, but the fact of the sightings at all was significant. There hadn't been any in the entire county for the last 30 years. Not since one was reported standing outside of the only hotel in town for hours and hours on a cold November night. People still talked about it. The moon was full and the winds raged. The Sasquatch slipped in and out of shadow. It raised its long arms toward the topmost windows, tilted its head back and opened its throat. The mournful sound it made, part howl, part moan, part long, sad song, is something that people in town still whispered about, now 30 years later. Lost my place. It was the longest time anyone could ever remember a Sasquatch standing in one place. Normally they were slippery things, elusive, a flash at the corner of the eye, but here it stood, bold as brass, spilling its guts to whoever would listen. Unfortunately, no one spoke Sasquatch, so no one knew what it was so upset about. It was, if Father Lawrence remembered correctly, Mr. and Mrs. Sorensen's wedding night. Sasquatch sightings were fairly common back then, but they ceased after the hotel incident. It was like they all just up and disappeared. No one mentioned it right away. It's not like the Sasquatch put a notice in the paper, but after a while people noticed the Sasquatch were gone. Just gone. And now apparently they were back, or at least one was anyway. Barney Corman said he saw one picking its way across the north end of the bog, right outside the wildlife preserve. Ernesta Kooning said that there was a huge, shaggy something helping itself to the best crop of the Cortland apples that her orchard had ever produced. Bertie Larson said he saw one running off with one of his lambs. There were stick structures on Cassandra Gordon's hunting land, and the ghostly sound of tree knocking at night. Eamon Lomas stopped by and asked if there was any ecclesiastical precedence all allowing for the baptism of a Bigfoot. Father Lawrence said no. "Seems a shame, though, don't it?" asked Eamon, running his tongue over his remaining teeth. Never thought about it before, Father Lawrence said. But that was a lie, and he knew it. Agnes Sorensen, before she was married, had asked him the exact same question 30 years earlier, and his answer then had made her cry. On Halloween, Father Lawrence, in an effort to avoid the parish council and their incessant harping on the subject of holidays, godless or otherwise, and to avoid the flurry of their phone calls and visits and post-it notes and emails and faxes and, once, horrifyingly, an intervention. "Is it the costumes, Father?" the eldest of the sisters had asked pointedly, "or the unsupervised visits from children that makes you so unwilling to take a stand on the effects of Satanism through Halloween worship?" They folded their hands and waited. "Or perhaps," the youngest added, "it's a sugar addiction." Father Lawrence decided to pay Mrs. Sorensen a visit. 3 weeks had passed, after all, since the death of her husband, and the widow's freezer and pantry were surely stocked with the remains of the frozen casseroles and lasagnas and brown-up rolls and mason jars filled with homemade chili and chicken soup and wild rice stew and beef consommé. Surely the bustle and cheeping of the flocks of women who descend upon houses of tragedy had by now migrated away, leaving the lovely Mrs. Sorensen alone and quiet, in need of company. Besides, wild rice stew, especially if it came from the Larson home, didn't sound half bad on a cold Halloween night. The Sorensen farm, once the largest tract in the county, was nothing more than a hobby farm now. Mrs. Sorensen had neither the aptitude nor the inclination for farming, so his wife had convinced him to cede his birthright to the Nature Conservancy, retaining a bit of the acreage to allow her to maintain a good-sized orchard and berry farm. Mrs. Sorensen ran a small business in which she made small batch hard ciders, berry wines, fine jams. Father Lawrence couldn't imagine that her income could sustain her for long, but perhaps Mr. Sorensen had been well insured. He knocked on the door. The house erupted with the animals' sounds. Wet noises pressed at the windows, and sharp claws worried at the door. The house barked, screeched, groaned, hissed, snuffed, and whined. Father Lawrence took a step backward. An owl peered through the transom window, its pale gold eyes unblinking. The priest cleared his throat. "Mrs. Sorensen?" A throaty gurgle from indoors. "Agnes?" Father Lawrence had known Agnes Sorensen since her girlhood. Her last name was Dryleasker, back then. She was the little girl down the road with a large arthritic goose under one arm and a bull snake curled around the other. He would see her playing in front of the house at the end of the dead-end street when he came home for the summers during seminary. "An odd family," his mother used to say, with a definitive shake of her head, "and that girl is the oddest of them all." Lawrence didn't think so then, and he certainly didn't think so now. Agnes in her knee socks and Mary Jane's in her A-line dresses that her mother had made from old curtains, and her pigtails pale as stars, simply had an affinity for animals. In the old barn in their backyard, she housed the creatures that she had found, as well as those that had traveled long distances just to be near her. A hedgehog with a missing foot, a blind weasel, a six-legged frog, a neurotic wren, a dog whose eardrums had popped like balloons when he wandered too near a TNT explosion on his owner's farm. She once came home with a wolf cub, but her father wouldn't allow her to keep it. She had animals waiting for her by the back door each morning, animals who would accompany her on her way to school, animals who helped with her chores, animals who sat on her lap as she did her homework, and animals who curled up on her bed when she slept. But then she got married to Mr. Sorensen. Good man and kind, and he needed her, but he was allergic, so their house was empty. Mr. Sorensen was also, Father Lawrence learned from the confessional booth, infertile. Agnes only came to confession once a year, and she rarely spoke during her time in the booth. Most of the time she would sit, sigh, and breathe in the dark. The booth was anonymous in theory, but Mrs. Sorensen had a smell about her, crushed herbs and apple cider and pine sap and grass, and he could identify from across the room. Her silence was profound and nuanced, like the silence of a pine forest on a windless summer day. It creaked and rustled, it warmed the blood. Father Lawrence would find himself fingering his collar, now terribly tight, and mopping his brow with his hands. He worried for Mrs. Sorensen. She was young and vibrant and terribly alive, and yet she seemed in stasis to him somehow. She didn't seem to age. She had none of the spark she had as a child, and it was as though her soul was hibernating. There was a time, maybe 15 years ago, when Mrs. Sorensen had closed the door of the booth behind her and sat for 10 minutes in the dark while the priest waited. Finally, she spoke in the darkness, not a prayer. Indeed, Father Lawrence didn't know what it was. When a female wolverine is ready to breed, Mrs. Sorensen said in the faceless dark, she spends weeks tracking down potential mates and weeks separating the candidates. She stalks her unknowing suitors, monitoring their habits, assessing their skills as hunters and trackers, evaluating their abilities in a fight. Do they prefer the tooth or the claw? Are they brave to the point of stupidity? Do they run when danger is imminent? Do they push themselves to greatness? Father Lawrence cleared his throat. Have you forgotten the prayer, my child? He said, his voice a timid whine. Mrs. Sorensen ignored him. She does not do this for protection or need. Her mate will be useful for all of 2 minutes. Then she will never see him again. He will not protect his brood or defend his lover. He will be chosen, hired, used. He will not be loved. His entire purpose is to produce an offspring that will eventually leave its mother. She needs a child that will live. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned, prompted Father Lawrence. That's how people usually... Now, in the case of a black bear, when the female becomes aware of the new life in her womb, she makes special consideration to the construction of the den. She is at risk, and she knows it. Pheromones announcing her condition leak from every pore. Her footsteps reek pregnant. Her urine blinds the road signs. Her blinks like road signs. Her fertility hangs around her body like a cloud. Agnes! When she digs her den, she moves over a ton of rock and soil. She designs it specially to provide a small mouth that she can stop her up with her back if she needs to. Agnes, she will grow in the dark, and the birth in the dark, and suckle her babies, the feminine funk of that tiny space smelling of mother and baby, and sweat and blood and milk and breathing in warm earth, hiding under the thick protection of snow. Her voice caught. She hiccuped. Agnes! I thought I was anonymous. And you are. I call all my confessionals Agnes. She laughed in the dark. I am asleep, Father. I've been asleep for ever so long. My arms are weak and my breasts are dry, and there is a cold, dark space within me that smells of nothing. She sat still for a moment or two, then, I love my husband. I know, child, he whispered. I love him desperately. What she wanted to say, the priest knew, was, I love him, but she didn't. She said nothing else. After another moment's silence, she opened the door, stepped into the light, and vanished. Father Lawrence had no doubt that Agnes Sorensen had loved her husband, and that she missed him. They had been married for 30 years, after all. She had cared for him and tended to him every day. His death was sudden, and certainly one must grieve in one's own way. Still, the sheer number of animals in the house was a cause for concern. The list of possible psychiatric disorders alone was nearly endless. The priest walked out into the apple barn, but no one was there, just the impossibly sweet smell of cider. It nearly knocked Father Lawrence to his knees. He closed his eyes and remembered picking apples with one of the girls at school when he was a child. Sticky fingers, sticky mouths, sticky necks, and sticky trousers. He was 11 then, maybe, or 12. He remembered her long hair and her black eyes and the way they fell from the lowest tree branch, a tangle of arms and legs and torsos, the crush of grass underneath, her freckles next to his eyelashes, his front tooth chipping against hers. After all those years, the chip was still there. The smell of her breath like honey and wine and growing wheat. So strong was this memory, and so radically pleasant, that Father Lawrence felt weak and shivery. There was a cot in the barn. He didn't know what it was there for, and he lay upon it. It smelled of woodland musk and pine. It was covered in hair. He slept instantly. In his dream, he was barefoot and lanky and young. He was on the prowl. He was hungry. He was longing for something that he could not name, something that had no words, or perhaps he had no words, or perhaps words no longer existed. He was full of juice and vigor and hope. He was watching Agnes Sorensen through a curtain of green leaves. She carried a heaping basket of apples, a checkered shirt, apple-stained dungarees, a bandana covering her head, Wellington boots up to her knees, each footfall sinking deep into the warm, sweet mud. When Father Lawrence woke, it was fully dark. Was someone watching? Surely not. He got up off the cot, brushed the hair from his coat and trousers. His body ached, and he felt curiously empty, as though he had been somewhere scooped out. And he walked out into the moonlit yard. Mrs. Sorensen wasn't in the barn. She wasn't in the yard. She wasn't in the house either. Was that a shape in the bushes? Were those eyes? Heavens, what am I thinking? The house had been emptied of its animal sounds, and emptied of its light, and the smell and being. It was quiet. He knocked. No one answered. He walked over to the car. There were footprints he saw in the mud next to the driveway. Wellington boots sunk deep into the mud and dried along the edges, and another set just alongside. Bare feet, a man's possibly, but very, very large. Thanksgiving passed with several invitations to take the celebratory meal with neighbors or former co-workers or friends who would have welcomed Mrs. Sorensen with open arms, but these were all denied. She said simply that she would enjoy the quiet. But surely that made no sense. There was no one on earth quieter than Mrs. Sorensen. The man hardly spoke. Excuse me. And so her neighbors carved their turnkeys and their hams. They sliced pie and drank to one another's health, but their minds wandered to the pretty widow with hair like starlight, her straight back, her slim skirts and smart belts, and her crisp footsteps when she walked. People remembered her lingering smell, the forest and the blooming meadow and some kind of animal musk, something that clung to the nose and pricked at the skin and set the mouth watering. And they masked their longing with another helping of yams. The three sisters on the parish council, on the other hand, didn't see what the big fuss was all about. They always thought she was plain. Randall Jurgen, not the worst drunkard in town, but well on his way to becoming so, claimed that, when he stumbled by the Sorensens' house by mistake, he saw the widow seated at the head of the well-laid table, heaped to the point of breaking with boiled potatoes and candied squash and roasted vegetables of every type and description, with each chair filled, not with relatives or friends or even acquaintances, but with animals. He said there were 2 dogs, 1 raccoon, 1 porcupine, 1 lynx, and an odd-looking bear sitting opposite the pretty window, a bear who grasped its own wine goblet and held it aloft to the smiling Mrs. Sorensen, who raised her own glass in response. The insufferable sisters investigated. They found no evidence of feasting, and while they did see the dogs, the tiny cat, the raccoon, the lynx, and the porcupine, they saw no signs of a wine-drinking bear, which they told themselves they needed to know whether or not was true. Drunk bears, after all, were a community safety hazard. They reported to the stylist at the Clip and Curl that Mrs. Jurgen was, as usual, Mr. Jurgen was, full of hogwash. By evening, the whole town knew and the matter was settled for a little while. By Christmas, there had been no less than 27 reports of Sasquatch sightings near or around or on the Sorensen farm. 2 people claimed to have seen a Sasquatch wearing a seed cap with a glass factory logo on it, and one swore that it was wearing Mr. Sorensen's old coat. The sheriff, 2 deputies, and the game manager at the local private wildlife refuge, and 3 representatives from the Department of Natural Resources all paid the widow a visit. Each left the farm looking dejected. Mrs. Sorensen was not apparently available for drinks or dinner or dancing. She answered their questions with crisp answers that could have meant anything. She watched them go with a vague smile on her lips. The insufferable sisters investigated as well. They looked for footprints and boot prints. They looked for discarded hats and thrown-off coats. They hunted for evidence of possible suitors. They interviewed witnesses. They found nothing. By late January, neighbors noticed that Mrs. Sorensen began to walk with a noticeable lightness. Despite the parka and the heavy boots, despite the sheepskin mitts and the felted scarf, her feet seemed to float atop the surface of the snow, and her skin appeared to sparkle, even on the most laden of days. Bachelors and widowers, and if honesty prevails, several uncomfortably married men as well, still opened doors for the pretty widow, still tipped their hats in her direction, still offered to carry her groceries or see to her barn's roof, or check to make sure her pipes weren't in danger of freezing. This last one was often said suggestively and almost always returned with a definitive slap. The insufferable sisters' farm. They came laden with hot dish, the ambrosia salad, and bars of every type and description. They sat the poor widow down, put the kettle on, and tapped their long red talons on the well-oiled wood of the ancient farm table. "Well," said Mrs. Ostergaard, the eldest of the sisters. "Oh," said Mrs. Sorensen, her cheeks flushing to high color. "The tea is in the top drawer in the far right cabinet." Her eyes slid to the window where the snowflakes fell in thick curtains, blurring the blanketed yard, and obscuring the dense thicket of scrub and saplings on the other side of the gully. The corners of her lips buzzed with something. Mrs. Ostergaard couldn't tell, and it infuriated her. Mrs. Lentz, the youngest of the sisters, and Mrs. Ferris, the middle, served the lunch, arranging the food in sensibly sized mounds, each one slick and glistening. They piled the bars on the pretty plates and put real cream in the pitcher and steaming tea in the pot. They sat, sighed, smiled, and interrogated the pretty widow. She answered questions and nodded serenely, but every time there was a lull in the conversation, and there were many, her eyes would insinuate themselves toward the window again, and a deepening blush would spread down her throat and edge into the opening of her blouse. The dogs lounged on the window seat, and the raccoons picked at its bowl on the floor on the mudroom. 3 cats snaked through the legs of the 3 sisters, and their backs an insistent arch, their rumps requiring a rub, and all the while an aggressive purr rattling the air around them. "Nice kitty," Mrs. Ostergaard said, giving one of the cats a pat on the head. The cat hissed. The sisters leapt in the snow. "Be careful," Mrs. Sorensen said as she stood in the doorway, straight-backed and inscrutable as a polished wood. "It's coming down all right." Her eyes flicked toward the back of the yard, a flushed smile on her lips. Mrs. Ostergaard whipped around and glanced through the thick tangle of snow. A figure, dark, fast, and then it was gone. Snowflakes clung to her eyelashes and forehead. Cold drops of water crowded her eyes. She shook her head and peered into the chaos of white. Nothing was there. The sisters piled into their Volvo and eased onto the road, a dense, blinding cloud swirling in their minds. The next day, they called a meeting with Father Lawrence. Father Lawrence withstood the indignities of their fussing and relative silence, the scent of apples after all this time, still clinging sweetly in his nostrils. The day after that, they called a second meeting, this time calling the priest, the mayor, the physician, the dog catcher, and a large animal veterinarian. They were all men, these official and professionals that the sisters assembled, and all were seated on folding chairs. The sisters stood over them like prison guards. The men hung on their cold metal chairs for dear life. They said yes to everything. 3 days later, Arnold Fisk, teetotaler since the day he was born, nearly ran Mrs. Sorensen over with his Buick. It was a warm night for February, and the road was clear. The sun was down, and the sky was a livid color of orange. On either side of the road, the frozen bog stretched onward, as big as the world. Indeed, it was the bog that distracted Arnold Fisk from the primary task of driving. His eyes lingered on the dappled browns and grays and whites, on the slim torsos of the quaking aspens and the river birches and the Norway pines, fluttering like flags on the occasional hillock. He lingered on the fluctuations of color on the snow, orange dappling to pink fading to ashy blue. He returned his gaze to the road, only just in time. He saw the face of Mrs. Sorensen, that beautiful face, lit in the beam of his headlights, and something else to a hulk of a figure, like a man, but more than a man, and no face at all. Arnold Fisk swerved. Mrs. Sorensen screamed, and from somewhere, the frozen bog, the fading sky, the aggressively straight road, or somewhere deep inside Arnold Fisk himself, erupted a ragged, primal howl. It shook the glass and sucked away the air and shattered his bones and his body. His car squealed and spun. Mrs. Sorensen was pulled out of the car's path by something, and then everything was quiet. He got out of the car, breathing heavily, his dyspepsia burned bright as the road flares. He pressed his left hand on the bottom rim of his ribcage and grimaced. "Oh, my God," he gasped. Agnes Sorensen, are you all right?" He rounded the broad prow of the Buick, saw the horror on the other side of the car, and felt his knees start to buckle. He fell hard on his rear and scrambled back with a strangled cry. There was Agnes Sorensen, her long down coat bunched up around her middle, her hood thrown off, and her starlight-colored hair yanked free of its bun and rippled toward the ground, curled in the long arms of a man covered in hair. Not a man. Her voice was calm. Her hands were on the man's face. No, not the man's face, and not a face either. It was a thicket of fur and teeth and red glowing eyes. Arnold Fisk's breath came in hot, sharp bursts. "What is that thing?" he choked. He could barely breathe. His chest hurt. He pressed his hands to his heart to make it sure it wasn't going to beat out of him. The last thing he needed was to have a heart attack in the presence of he couldn't say. He couldn't even think it. Mrs. Sorensen didn't notice. Her voice was a smooth lullaby, a gentle insistence, a mother's voice, a lover's voice, or both at once. "I'm all right," she soothed. "You see, I'm here. I'm not hurt. Everything is fine. Everything is wonderful." The man, not a man, bowed its head into Agnes Sorensen's chest. It sighed, it snuffed. It cradled her body in its great shaggy arms and rocked her back and forth. It made a series of sounds, part rumble, part hiccup, part gulping sob. My God, Arnold Fisk thought, it's crying. He sat up, then stood up and took a step away. Arnold shook his head. He tried to hold his breath, but small bursts still erupted, unbidden from his throat, as though his soul and his fear and his sorrow were all escaping in sighs. In any case, he felt escaping. He felt neither his fear nor his sorrow as he looked at the widow and her companion. He had never felt his soul. He wasn't even sure that he had one. He cleared his throat. Would you? He said, and faltered. He started again. Would you and your friend? He paused again, wrinkled his brow, muscled through. Need a ride? Mrs. Sorensen smiled and wrapped her arms around the Sasquatch's neck. Because that, Arnold Fisk realized, is what I'm seeing. A Sasquatch. Well, my stars. No, thank you, Mr. Fisk, Agnes Sorensen said, extricating herself from the Sasquatch's arms and helping it to its feet. The night is still fine, and the stars are just coming out, and they say the auroras will be burning bright later on. I must stay out all night. And with that, she and the Sasquatch walked away, hands held as though it was the most normal thing in the world, and perhaps it was. In any case, Arnold Fisk couldn't shut up about it. By noon the next day, the whole town knew. A Sasquatch! The widow and a Sasquatch! Good gracious! What will they think of next? 2 days later, the pair were spotted in public, walking along the railroad tracks, and again picking their way across the bog. And again, standing in the back of the crowd at a liquidation auction, the Sasquatch sometime wore Mr. Sorensen's old seed hat and boots. He had cut out the holes for his large, flexible toes, and sometimes wore the dead man's scarf, but never his pants, or some kind of shorts, or, dear God, at least some swimming trunks. The Sasquatch was in possession, thankfully, of a bulbous thicket of fur, concealing the area of concern, but everyone knew what was behind that fur, and they knew it would only take a stiff breeze or a sudden movement, or perhaps the presence of a female Sasquatch to cause a shaking of the bushes, as it were, or a parting of the weeds. People kept their eyes averted, just to be safe. And the sisters were enraged. Mrs. Sorensen was spotted walking with the Sasquatch past the structures and artistic sculptures of Armistice Park. Children, play at that park, howled the sisters. They called Father Lawrence at home 19 times and left 19 messages with varying levels of vitriol. Fool of a priest was a phrase they used, and useless. Father Lawrence, for his part, went to the woods alone. He walked the same paths he had followed in his boyhood. He remembered the rustle of the raven's wings, and the silent pounce of an owl, and the snuffling of bears, and the howling of wolves, and the scamper of rabbits, and the slurping of moose. He remembered something else, too, a large, dark figure in the densest places of the wood and the tangled thickets of the bog, a pair of bright eyes and sharp teeth and long, loose-limbed, lumbering gait that went like a shot over the prairie. He was 11 years old when he last saw a Sasquatch, and now all he had to do was pick up the phone and invite Mrs. Sorensen over for dinner. Huh, he thought. Imagine that. And you know what? We don't have time to finish this. There's only a few pages left. So, all of you listening on the radio, I hate to do this. There's not enough to stretch this into a second episode tomorrow. But let me suggest that if you'd like to hear the end of this story, which was just a little lark to read tonight, come on over to the YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. join the chat room over there, and we'll finish up this story. But for now, we've got a little less than 2 minutes left to this program. And I see that there's been all kinds of people chatting it up over at the in our chat room at the YouTube channel. And I want to say I'm not ignoring you. I just didn't want to break the flow of the story. And so from where we left off here, we've only got, I think, about 3 or 4 pages left of this book, this small book. And so it shouldn't take very long. So if you all want to come over and listen, come on over and hear it. We got about 1 minute and 15 seconds, and we'll be out of here on the radio station and the audio format for now. But you can come right over to the chat room in the on the YouTube page, and we'll still be live over there. We'll keep things up and running with the Captain's Cabin. So stick around for a few minutes, guys, if you want to hear the end of the story, Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch. This was authored by, I've got to call her name up again, only because I don't have it right in front of me. The story was, well, good grief. I got to see where to get into the story again. Not there. It's over here. I should have had this memorized. And it's not even on here. It's not on the page I'm on, and I don't want to lose my place. So, yeah, you can see it. It's in the graphic for tonight's show. So we've got a few seconds left. We're going to go dark, and we're going to go out right now. So you guess what? I want you all to live long and prosper.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
All right, folks, we are back still live over on the YouTube channel, and we are just about to go off air. Well, we are off air, but I've got to disconnect right now. Boom, we are disconnected, and I am going to stop the recording for the archive. This goes on the radio show, the radio station, so there's no sense recording the end of the story over here. Yes, the story is, it's called Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch, and this is by, let me find it here. The author, it's an easy name, Kelly Barnhill. Kelly Barnhill. Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch. I went to Amazon. I saw it somewhere. I don't remember where it was, months ago. And I bought it, the audiobook for, or not audio, the Kindle book for 99 cents. And so, wow, it seems really bright on this screen all of a sudden. There we go. A little better. I bought it for 99 cents. And it's a really neat little book. So if everybody is ready, let's just pick up right where we left off. I don't know how much is left, but not very much left to this story. So I never got this far with my kids, frankly. I read it 1 or 2 nights and we never finished it because we got distracted with something else and never picked it up again. So here goes. This is the end of the story. It ended with this paragraph that Father Lawrence was 11 years old when he last saw a Sasquatch. And now all he had to do was pick up the phone and invite Mrs. Sorensen over for dinner. Huh, he thought. Imagine that. The meal, though quiet, was pleasant enough. The Sasquatch brought a bowl of wildflowers, which the priest ate. They were delicious. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Sorensen brought her Sasquatch to church. She brought her other animals, too, her one-eyed hedgehog, and her broken-winged hawk, and her tiny cat, and her raccoon, and her 3-legged dog, and her infant cougar, curled up and fast asleep on her lap. The family arrived early and sat in the front row, Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch in the middle, and the rest of the brood stretching on either side. Each one sat as straight-backed as was possible, with the particulars of their physiology, and each one was silent and solemn. The Sasquatch wore nothing other than Mrs. Sorensen's father's old fedora hat, which was perched at a bit of a saucy angle. Let's see, where was I? I was perched at a bit of a saucy angle. It held Mrs. Sorensen's hand in its great left paw and closed its large bright eyes. Father Lawrence did his pre-mass preparations and ministrations with the sacristy door locked. The sisters hovered on the other side, pecking at the door and squawking their complaints. Father Lawrence was oblivious. He was a great admirer of the inventor of earplugs, and made it a habit to stash an emergency set whenever he might find the need to surreptitiously insert a pair at a moment's notice. At his desk, at the podium, in his car, in the confessional, and in the sacristy. "A sacrilege!" Mrs. Ostergaard hissed. "Do something!" came Mrs. Lentz's strangled gasp. "Get that deer out of the church!" Mrs. Ferris roared, followed by a chaos of hooves and snorting, and the shouting of women and men, and the hooting of an old owl, and the cry of a peregrine, and the snarl of... Actually, Father Lawrence wasn't sure if it was a coyote or a wolf. Agnes Sorensen was too old to have children. Everyone knew that. But she had always wanted a family, and now she was so happy. Didn't she deserve to be happy? The sisters pecked and screeched. He imagined their fingers curling into talons, their imperious lips hardening to beaks. He imagined their appliqued cardigans and their floral skirts rustling into feathers and wings. He imagined their bright bead eyes launching skyward with wild high kiar of a hawk, or the hunt for something small and brown and wriggling. The priest stood in the sacristy, his eyes closed. "O God, your creatures fill the earth with wonder and delight," he sang. "Doris," he heard Mrs. Ferris say, "Doris, do not approach that cougar. Doris, it isn't safe." "And every living thing has worth and beauty in your sight," he kept singing. "Oh God, not a sheep, not sheep, anything but sheep. Get those animals out of here." "So playful dolphins dance and swim, your sheep bow down and graze." "Father, get out here this minute. 6 otters just came out of the bathroom. 6! And with rabies!" "Your songbirds share a morning hymn to offer you their praise," sang the father. There was a snarl, a screech, a cry of birds, a hiss and a bite, and several rarely used swears in the mouths of the parish council. Father Lawrence heard the clatter of their pastel heels and the oof of their round bottoms as they tipped on the stairs, and the howl of their voices as they ran down the street. Several men waited at the mouth of the sanctuary, looking sadly at the pretty widow next to her lurking companions. Next to her hulking companion. The men reeked of mustache oil and pomade. Their shoulders slumped, their bellies bulged, and their cheeks went slack and flaccid. "Hey there, Father!" Ernie Jurgen, Randall's sober brother, inclined his head toward the stoic family in the front row. "So that's it, then." He cleared his throat. "She's not single. She's attached, I mean." Father Lawrence clapped his hands on the shoulders of the men, sucked in his sagging belly as tight as he could. "Yep," he said, "seems so. Family is family, after all. The dead have buried the dead, and the living scramble and struggle as best they can. They press their shoulder against the rock and urge forward, even when all hope is lost. Agnes Sorensen was happy, and Agnes Sorensen was alive. So be it. He nodded at the organist to start the processional. The red-tailed hawk opened up its throat, and the young buck nosed the back of Father Lawrence's vestments, a pair of solemn eyes, a look of gravitas. Father Lawrence wondered if he should step aside, if he was interrupting something. 2 herons waited at the altar, and a pine marten sat on the lectionary. The organist sat under a pile of cats and made a valiant effort to pluck out the notes of the hymn. The congregation, both human and animal, opened their throats and began to sing, each in their own language, their own rhythm, their own time. The song deepened and grew. It shook the walls and rattled the glass and set the light fixtures swinging. The congregation sang the death of loved ones, a life eclipsed too soon. They sang of the waters of the bog and of the creak of the trees and of the padded feet on soft forest trails, of meals shared and families built, seeds in the ground, the screech of flight, the joy of a wriggling morsel in the sharp beak, the roar of pursuit and the gargles of satiation, the murmur of nesting, the smell of a mate, the howl of birthing, and the howl of loss, and howl and howl and howl. Father Lawrence processed in, open-mouthed, a dark yodel tearing through his belly. I am lost, he sang, and I am found. My body is naked in the muck. It has always been naked. I hope, I rage, I despair, I yearn, I long, I lust, I love. These strong hands that built, this strong back that carried, all must wither to dust. Indeed, I am dust already. Mrs. Sorensen and her Sasquatch watched him process down the aisle. They smiled at his song. He paused at their pew and let his hand linger on the rail. They reached out and touched the hem of his garment. It was, people remembered later, the prettiest mass they'd ever heard. Mrs. Sorensen and her family left after communion. They did not stay for rolls or coffee. They did not engage in conversation. They walked en masse into the bog. The tall grasses opened for a moment to allow them in and closed like a curtain behind. The world was birdsong and quaking mud and humming insects. The world was warm and wet and green. They did not come back. And there it is. That was Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch. It was written in 2014 by Kelly Barnhill. And there you go. I thought that was a sweet little book, and I wanted to share it with you all. Rather than get into studying some new topic, I was looking at many different things for today's show, and I thought, nope, I'm just going to do this. A little break from headiness, perhaps. Break from politics. Break from all the stuff we normally talk about. So, there you go. Sorry, I was with the unhip in the front row. Oh, there you go. It was a fun story, Matt Finn. You're welcome. And everybody, you're welcome. Romeldian, you too, and David Castle, greetings and favor, he says. Thank you, Leslie. I'm glad you enjoyed it. You too, Morgan Snow. And we should do that every now and then. Read a nice little story. So again, if you want to buy it, Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch by Kelly Barnhill. You can find it at Amazon or somewhere online. You can look that up. And you'll find probably Amazon, because you can get the 99-cent electric book, ebook. They might not even have it in hardback. I think it only is an ebook, come to think of it. I'm not positive of Thank you, Barbie D. You're welcome, Steve Clark. It was a lot of fun. Audrey's here. I saw somebody say greetings in favor to Audrey. I don't even see her. Hey, Audrey, if you're out there, nice to see you. Or see that somebody thought you were here. Steph, I want to see that movie too. I think it'll be very good. Dave Potter. Uncle Dave is here. You talking to me?
He's laying on my desk, and he keeps touching my stuff.
The cat?
The cat.
Oh, send him off your desk.
And he keeps touching my buttons and grabbing at my hand and moving them out.
The cat, Oscar du Blanc. No, Oscar du Negre. Oscar the Black. He's our old man cat. He's laying up on Rainey's desk as she's typing something, and he keeps messing with her buttons. I see him.
And then he sprawls over and hits my keyboard.
Crawls over, tries to get on her lap, hits the keyboard. So there you go. Sean Stroik was here. Good to see you. I don't know if you're still here. Michelle Canham-Free is here. Audrey was here. Mickey Mouse is working for me crazy hours. So I can't catch Scotty all the time. I sure do miss hanging out with all of you. Nice to see you, Audrey. Don't know if you're still here, but there you go. Did you ever get anything cold to drink? I did not. My own fault. I make a rule with the kids. If you take something out of this fridge, a can of pop or water or something, put one back. Well, I didn't follow my own rules, and I don't have any cold sodas in there. So, or cold waters. I'd have to go upstairs and get something. I'll get something to drink in a few minutes here. So.
Stop. Come on, I put the kids to bed. Why can't you leave me alone?
How come there's no screaming or anything when you're out here and the kids are in bed?
Because the light's on and they're all on devices.
Oh, they're all on devices. There's school tomorrow. So, to the kids, I say that. Cats are the worst when you're trying to work. Ain't that the truth? Amazon only has it on Kindle. That must be it, Leslie. I don't think they even made a hardcover, but I'm not sure of that. I think I remember when I saw the book at the time, I wanted to buy the book, but all they had was the 99-cent Kindle. So there you go. It's got a nice cover design, and that's what publishers will do or independent authors will do many times. If they're just publishing to Kindle or an ebook, they just have a front cover designed, and that's it. So Steph says, I have some liquid IV you can have. Is that an IV or a 4? Liquid 4? Liquid IV.
That's that stuff I drink.
Oh, the vitamin stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, I drink one of those almost every day. So we've got some too, says Rainey. So, since my wife is up, I'm probably not going to stay on here too much longer. She's usually sleeping by now. So, probably hang with her for a little bit without kids around. Whatever shall we do? I know we can talk. It's the blue one that Steph has. Yeah, I drink those. Every day I'll mix some of that in water in one of the big tumblers, and sometimes do a little squirt of the flavored water in it. I happen to like, and I'm not overly given to these, I love the peach vitamin water stuff that she gets.
That's Halo.
That tastes that's Halo?
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh my God, can you see this cat?
Yeah, I see him.
See his foot going?
I can't. It's dark. You see, you're sitting in the dark over there, so I can't really see him. Okay, lights going on. Oh, she's brushing his back as he's sitting on her desk, and he's just like, his leg is shaking. It's like nobody pays me no mind ever.
Now that I turn the light on.
That's all right. So, kids are still awake, Lelania. Yeah, our kids somehow skirt the laws around here, and I don't know why. So, I don't know how they get away with it, because I'm on the radio. And, go get her, Scotty, says Steph Cuervo Queen. Are you wearing underwear over there, Mrs. Roberts?
Nope.
Nope, she is not. That was the one important question I needed to ask. So, if you're on our Facebook, that you'll remember. She put up a post the other day saying she can't find any underwear. Olsen, says Dave Potter. So there you go. Yeah, she did a little happy dance going by here when I was starting the show. So, fresh. I see. The cat is. He is like an ecstasy over there. Oh, now he's rolling on his side. Get my side too. He's just like all over. I don't have any water over here. I didn't know what you were throwing at me, but it was coming right toward my head. Yeah, there's the stuff that Rainey uses. I take some of these every now and then just to make sure I'm hydrated. The peach one's the vitamin water.
No, that's vitamin water too. But the peach one is sugar-free.
Okay.
And it's Halo.
Sugar-free and it's Halo. And it's got vitamins. It's supposed to have all the vitamins I need.
It's got folate in that one.
So.
And I drink that every now and then.
I wish you could see this cat over there. Oh, he's in heaven. Then his head goes down on the table and his rump is still up in the air and he rolls his head and she's just brushing his back end down his back to his haunches. He's loving it. So, underwear is overrated, Melania. So, here's what I'm going to do. It's only fun to wear if someone's ripping it off, said Steph. That's true. Are you naked? Oh, you've got that. She's sitting over there. She got her computers in front of her, facing me.
I don't wear underwear to bed.
Well, I know that. But she's got this light-colored pink spaghetti string tank top on that almost matches her skin. So you can see your nipples? Yeah. Let's see. Hello! Sorry, folks. This is a kid's show. This is not I meant a family show. Hey, come here.
No, I'm messing with the cat.
Yeah, I know.
He's drooling.
He's digging it. He's drooling now, too. GNNTC, says Sean Stroik. Have a peaceful night, everyone, says Romeldian. Dave is going into the portrait studies tomorrow. I'll send you pictures. I was trying to find the larger high-res ones, and I can't find them. They must be on another disc, so I got to go dig them out. An older disc, I should say. So, all right, guys. I'm going to call it an evening. And you all have a good evening. Thanks for being here. Thanks for spending your time here. Yeah, it's a school night, says Leslie. If kids are watching this, it's their parents' fault. Boom. That's right. And we have such a huge child audience. He won't bite hard. He's like, when he bites, he's not even mad when he bites. He's just kind of, I'm like, hey, stop it. I tell him.
Brush. You can barely see the bristles.
I see. Well, it's got to feel good for him. Get all brushed out.
Too. I will not be brushing my hair with it.
And where is my hairbrush? Where is my hairbrush? Where, oh, where, oh, where, oh, where, oh, where is my hairbrush? All right, guys. I love you all. You have a good night. Thanks for being here. And we will see you again tomorrow night. Same time, same channel, all of that jazz. So, see you later. Good night. Live long and prosper.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.